Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our accessory dwelling unit and two-family dwelling webinar. We're going to be going over really just a lot of clarification on the legislation that's been put forward. We have a lot of people registered for today. We have 398 people registered. And a lot of pre-submitted questions that came in. The bulk of those questions will be answered at the end. Some of them will be sprinkled throughout the presentation. I'll call those out as I answer them. And then some of the more detailed questions, we're going to post on our frequently asked webpage with all of the questions typed out in detail with their answers, as well as we do have a chat set up. We'd ask that if you have any questions, put those questions in the chat. We will try to answer them verbally at the end, and we'll probably take about 5 or so questions to answer verbally at the end. But as you know, with 398 people, it's going to be hard to get to your questions at the end of this presentation. So what we're going to do is, as you submit your questions, we're going to take notes of them. We're going to have them in the chat, so we'll have record of them. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and answer them, type them up, and get back to you. And then also leave time and keep the questions open until January 14th, so that way we can go ahead and respond to them and have them to you by the time that council has their public hearing. So with that, as you can see, we have a room full of people. Pardon me?
They can't see your face.
Oh, I know.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought they'd be better off seeing the screen, but thank you, Kara's just giving me a little bit, you can't see my face. I don't know if you really want to see my face, but I think we're going to pay attention to the screen here. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our staff that you can see in the room. I have Mary Kendall to my right, who is the Deputy Director of Planning and Zoning. I have Kristen O'Connor, who is the Chief of our Community Comprehensive Planning Division. Carrie Lenny, who sent out all the emails, getting all this information out, who is our PIO for the Department of Planning and Zoning. Justin Tyler, our planner in the zoning division. Julia Sauer, who is our chief of zoning, and Jeff Delmonica, who is a comprehensive planner in the division of community and comprehensive planning. Also attended all of, I think, the housing work groups for the accessory dwelling units that the state hosted over the past year prior to the bill being passed by the Maryland General Assembly in April of this past year. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of what we'll be talking about today. So I'm going to basically cover the basics of 1466, which was the House bill, which is now law that was passed in the spring, our Housing Opportunities Master Plan, and how that informed COCO by Design, which is our general plan that was adopted in 23, what the county currently allows for accessory dwelling units, what is proposed in CB3, which was formerly known as the Zoning Regulation Amendment 218 versus the state bill. We're going to do a little interactive myth busting poll. We're going to go over your submitted questions, and then we'll take a few questions from the chat. And as I said, this will also be recorded and presented on our webpage after today's session. So if someone you know did not get an opportunity to sign up, or you can't stay for the whole presentation, because this will probably run a little after 5 p.m. A lot of material was added. Many of you might have attended the presentations that we were invited to give to the Affordable Housing Coalition, as well as the Howard County Citizens Association. So some of this material might be similar. We also added some new material based on information and questions that have come through, as well as the guidance that was released by the state recently. So there is some new material covered. So the slides are a little bit longer, so we might go over that hour time frame. So as you may be aware that the Maryland General Assembly passed in the spring of 25, the land use and real estate, the real property accessory dwelling unit requirements and prohibitions. It requires jurisdictions to enact legislation by this October. And it requires us, these local jurisdictions, to define ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which we'll be referring to ADUs from here on through the rest of the presentation. Is for local governments to adopt a local law authorizing the development on land with an existing single-family detached dwelling unit, sets a size cap of 75% of the primary structure, more specifically the primary structure at grade or above, so not including the basement square footage, and allows them to be separate from the primary single family dwelling, so a detached, as we would refer to it, ADU. So the intent of the law is for local jurisdictions to really have a path forward for ADUs if there's a single family detached dwelling unit located on that property. It's to provide for the construction of ADUs that meet the public health, safety, and welfare standards. And it exempts ADUs from density calculations and residential growth limits. It overrides other restrictions on ADUs and may not establish setback requirements that exceed the zoning district's accessory limits on ADUs, which they would otherwise reside in. So meaning that when you have your regulations for setbacks within your zoning district, an accessory limit is not the primary structures limit, so your main house's bulk regulation limit, but the limits of where a accessory structure can reside on that particular piece of property. Another good point to mention is that homeowners associations and other deeds, declarations, or contracts cannot prohibit their development or cannot prohibit you from renting or including renting these properties, but short-term rentals can be prohibited from accessory dwelling units. So for instance, they can be prohibited from Airbnbs and things like that. And does require the local jurisdiction to consider off-street parking requirements. So for instance, you would have to have a parking space that's off the street, so you can't have like people parallel parking in front of your house would not be considered appropriate parking for accessory dwelling unit. You would need a driveway or a special pad set aside for that ADU. Two resources I want to point out, and these are also on our webpage for you to look up at your leisure. So the top is the link to the actual bill itself, and then the second link is guidance that was just sent out by the Maryland Department of Planning, came out in December. So this actually clarifies some of the information too that we've presented in the past from Maryland Department of Planning, that is local guidance for local governments that MDP did put out recently. So there's some really good sources of information in their FAQs. So why are we doing this and why now for Howard County? So a few reasons. So not only is this driven by the state law that was passed in April, but also this is guidance from our Housing Opportunities Master Plan in 2021 that identified really a growing problem that we have not only in Howard County, really within the state of Maryland and the region, that identifies the growing problem of housing affordability. I think many of us can attest to how hard it is to find an affordable home within Howard County, and suggest zoning changes to support what we like to call that missing middle housing. So those types of duplexes, triplexes, and quads that are that infill development type of housing that really do support opportunities for home ownership and those entry-level homes within Howard County that we really don't have a lot of within our local jurisdiction. And the Housing Opportunities Master Plan informed POCO by Design, which is our general plan that was adopted 2 years ago, that identifies the need for affordable missing middle housing and recommends policies for where and to locate and develop diverse housing types with these infill types of housing, and encourages attached and detached ADUs. So that's another reason why we are really pushing forward with our accessory dwelling units. It's not only to comply with the state law fully, but also to work towards implementation of our general plan, which is critically important. So who benefits from ADUs? Many people benefit from accessory dwelling units. Homeowners benefit from ADUs to house a family member. And we hear this a lot that, young adults, we joke that they're going to be living in our basements after they graduate college, but we really do want more for them than that. And so a great way to start out for a young person that may not be able to afford an apartment, and other than them living in our basement, and a way for homeowners to also build equity in their homes, could be to build an accessory dwelling unit as an addition, or detached, or to have an additional finished space within their home. Or for a senior family member. We know about the exorbitant cost of healthcare and senior healthcare for nursing homes and continuing care facilities may be untenable for many families. So building a accessory dwelling unit is a path to that. And plus, you may want to just have a family member live with you to take care of them, and that close, tight-knit bond with your family, and having an ADU is one of those opportunities to have that. For middle to lower income tenants, having more units at an affordable price point, this just really offers one more tool in the toolbox. I mean, truly it is supply demand. The more supply you have with this high demand, the lower prices will be. That's just basic economics. For older adults to have a place for aging in place, they may choose to actually live in the ADU and have their sandwich generation live in the primary structure. And many of us are working on that now, where we are in our 40s or 50s, and we have younger families who are maybe college age children that are coming to live back at home, and then we have our older adults who are parents or seniors that may want to still not live in an age restricted community, that may want to live with us. So we have 3 generations living in a home where an ADU makes sense. Entry level professionals with flexible living arrangements, again, where they're not quite wanting to live in our basements, but may want to live on our property in an accessory dwelling unit, either attached or separate from our home. Others who really do benefit from ADU are local businesses. Employee housing, I was part of the econ task force that the county just stood up, and the report will be issued in the next few weeks with the announcement. But what we hear from a lot of local businesses, there are not enough places, especially for our service industry folks, to live and afford in Howard County. Yet we depend on those employees to provide the services that we need in Howard County. Real estate firms to add to our rental housing stock. Residential contractors for remodeling, that helps generate business for them, and then lending institutions that they give out for home improvement loans. So how do we handle ADUs today in Howard County? So we actually do currently allow them. We just call them accessory apartments. So one of the things that this legislation does propose with CB3 is to update the naming convention from accessory apartments to accessory dwelling units. And we currently allow accessory apartments within a home or attached to a primary dwelling unit. And that has to be attached by a common law within that unit. And these are allowed by right in certain districts. And in upcoming slides, I'll show you what districts those are currently allowed in. And we also allow temporary accessory family dwellings, and those are detached. And what's really interesting about this is that we allow them detached either as a removable dwelling or converted existing accessory structure, and they're as a conditional use. And the criteria is that it is for a person who is 62 years of age or older, so for senior housing, if you meet the conditional use criteria and you're willing to pay the base fee of $2,550, or it is someone 18 years old or older who has a mental or physical limitations that would require them living on your property. And then they have to be temporary. So when that person no longer needs to live in that home, you would then take away the structure from being able to be a accessory dwelling unit. So you would spend all of this time, effort, and energy building the structure only to have it no longer cease to exist as an ADU. So this legislation would get rid of that, investment, the ability to have that investment be taken away from you. So since we've been keeping track since 2015, a little fun fact in the upper right-hand corners, we have 244 accessory apartments in Howard County that are internal or attached to already existing units. So we'll show in the next slides how these are currently allowed. So again, how we currently have them is accessory apartments are allowed by right, only permitted on owner-occupied lots. The maximum size currently is 1/3 of the net floor area up to the cap of 1,500 square feet and limited to no more than 2 bedrooms in the ADU portion and 1 parking space. So you can see in the graphic to the right, this is what typical ADUs would look like for an internal ADU. Where you see the accessory unit could be in the basement or actually could be in an attic space. No more than 1/3 of the total space and up to 1,500 square feet. And then an accessory apartment as a conditional use for lots under 12,000 square feet. Whoops, excuse me. And so just so you can see too, how is this really complicated when you do need a conditional use standard for lots under 12,000 square feet, or if you needed them as a temporary accessory dwelling, is what the conditional process does do. It adds time and it adds cost at a minimum. So a typical conditional use petition starts at $2,500. That's just for the petition itself. Each petition requires at least 1 sign per property, sometimes more, depending on the size of your lot. And then advertising for the Baltimore Sun, and we typically require advertising in 2 papers of general circulation. So advertising in the Sun is $398, plus the Washington Post is $770. And then we always recommend that you have a land use attorney be a part of the process. So whatever their particular fee is, and an engineer depending on how the site is developed. So if you have detached accessory dwelling unit, which would be your temporary accessory family dwelling, you would definitely want an engineer to place the site on the property and draw that up for you, whatever their particular fee is, or if you're doing attached by a common wall, plus any other fees that may come out of their time, effort, and energy, and then your time, which is typically priceless. I mean, to go through this process just with the conditional use could take 3 to 5 months. So you can see how this becomes less and less of an affordable issue and an affordable path for you when you have to go through this conditional use process. And a lot of the conditional use portion of this is not really protecting the surrounding community. It becomes more of a subjective issue for the hearings examiner to hear, and without additional protective measures for that community. And so looking at some additional concerns or issues with ADUs in the county. So adequate public facility ordinance. So testing for actual, which is, I know has been a lot of discussion point, occurs during the subdivision and site plan process. So both the accessory attached internal ADUs would not require outflow testing. They don't currently, because testing only occurs at the subdivision and site plan process. So accessory apartments, as they stand today, do not require either. So outflow is not tested currently. That's for schools, roads, water, sewer, again, because they're internal to the structure. Additions or accessory structures are subject to building permit requirements. Under 5,000 square feet are not subject to a red line requirement. So I know there's a lot of talk, oh, plants would be red line, so these things would happen, but we don't red line plants. Or in addition, if you were to come put a kitchen on your home, you wouldn't necessarily be red line for that plant. We wouldn't do an outflow requirement to say, do you have enough water to add that kitchen? And do you have enough sewer to dispose of your additional sink? Your additional dishwasher, if you have an extra bathroom, and we wouldn't be doing those things. So why would we be holding an accessory dwelling unit to similar standards for the square footage? So where are ADUs currently allowed in Howard County? So this map shows where accessory apartments currently are allowed by right. So this shows the blue area where the geography where they are currently allowed by right. And you can see the districts where they are allowed by right. So there are 9 districts in which we allow ADUs by right. The RC, RR, R20, R12, RED, RSC, Newtown, RS8 and PGCC districts. So there are 146,908 number of acres that currently allow ADUs by right. And Howard County is 160,640 acres. So that means 91.45% of the county already allows accessory apartments. So attached and detached ADUs that would be permitted in the following zones. So prior zoning districts, again, I already listed those out. So then, as you can see, I'm going from this map to this map, adds the orange polygons. You can see the change below. So then we added an additional districts for a total of 11 added districts, which is an additional 2,600 acres added to this total. So that's a 1.5% increase in the amount of actual acreage and percentage of land where ADUs will now be allowed under this council bill. So another change to the zoning code is two-family dwellings. So two-family dwellings are not duplexes. Duplexes are different than two-family dwellings according to our code definition. Two-family dwellings are defined as a building which contains two dwelling units, of which neither is an accessory apartment, and which is arranged or designed for use and occupancy by two families. So two-family dwellings and a two-family dwelling unit are not separated by an attached garage or by an enclosed breezeway. So how is this different than a duplex? A duplex is a semi-detached unit, and those units are actually separated by a parcel or property boundary. So they're actually, each unit is on its own lot, where two-family dwelling is made up on the same unit. And as this code change is proposed with ADUs, a ADU is only allowed one per property, not by the unit type. So that would change. So this would not change anything with this ADU legislation. It would still be the same. So currently, from 2015 to 25, only 9 two-family dwellings have been approved in the county. So again, two-family dwellings each acts as a primary structure and neither is subordinate to one another. So again, each are equal in size on a particular property, and they can be side by side, one on top of another. So that's what we mean by two-family dwellings. And currently, in our conditional use standards, again, the conditional use requirements are very subjective. The conditional use is provided that any new structure or addition will be designed to be compatible in scale and character with the surrounding residential neighborhood. And compatibility of the character may be architectural style, materials, or details, and compatibility shall be demonstrated by architectural elevations or renderings submitted with the petition. And what's proposed in this new council bill is to not remove any of those things when you're submitting for that. It's part of what's written into the code, but instead of going through the conditional use process, that would just be part of the description of the district. But the lot sizes would still prevail for the RC and RR district, and the lot square footage minimums for the smaller districts of 16,000 square feet for the RED and R12. So really very little is changing except for going through that conditional use process for the subjectivity of the character of the community that it's surrounding. So again, here's some additional information regarding what ADUs would look like. So ADUs can be attached or detached within an existing primary structure. So again, here is an example of what the internal ADU would look like in a basement or in an attic. So those are interior ADUs. ADUs can have a maximum size equivalent to 70% of the lot coverage of the primary existing dwelling. So this is how our proposal is being written. And this is less than the state max. As I said earlier, the state maximum is 75% of the above area square footage. an owner must occupy the primary or the accessory structure. And so I know there's been some chatter regarding that this is not seen in the bill, or where is this in the bill? Well, the reason it's not being seen in the bill is in the planning board proposal. That is correct. The owner occupancy requirement was removed. But when it was filed with council, the reason you don't see a change is because it was never changed from what the actual code currently says. So there was no reason to strike anything out or add anything in. The code was just left as is. So if you look at the page 2 of the bill, line 7, you can see the owner occupancy standard still stands. And that's the same as the bedroom maximum. So those bedroom maximums were proposed as part of the planning board proposal originally to be removed. So that way the size limitation would really tell you how many bedrooms you could have, because that would be limited by how big the accessory dwelling unit could be. But in order to keep that guardrail, and the planning board suggesting keeping that 2-bedroom maximum in. So again, because the current county code requires a 2-bedroom maximum, there was no need to add in or strike out any part of the existing code, rather than it just stayed the same as it is now. So again, permit ADUs as an accessory use in any district that allows, so this is the current proposal, single family detached, attached, semi-detached, which is that duplex, which is different than, again, a 2-family dwelling. And it removes the conditional use categories for 2-family dwellings, accessory apartments under 12,000 square feet, and that temporary accessory family dwelling, which was that allowance for detached family dwellings. ADUs will be exempt from lot coverage restrictions. Whoops, excuse me. And the reason that is because lot coverage restrictions not only pertains to the primary principal structure, but also goes to your pools, your sheds, your decks, other things that would then could prohibit having an ADU built. And again, we want to promote housing, affordable housing. And so removing the lot coverage restriction is one more ability to have an ADU be built on properties. ADUs will not be included in density calculations, and that's part of the state requirement. And the idea, again, is if you have a particular zoning district that only allows 4 dwelling units per acre, and you already have met that density limitation, which most builders do when they go into a community, they're going to build to the maximum density that they can build, then you would already be prohibited right off the bat from having an ADU being built. So you cannot have a density cap on many of the ADU allocations, because you would never be able to meet them if you had to include your density calculation. So then if everyone in your district, if you had 4 dwelling units per acre, and that was the max density, and you already met that, then you would never be able to have an accessory dwelling unit. ADUs shall be approved through a DPC permit process, similar to the current accessory apartment process. So for that, we would require documentation for floor plans, a plot plan with the size of the ADU and available parking, on-site water conveyance, elevation drawing demonstrating the compatibility with the primary dwelling. So siding, window placement, roof pitch. So here's an example of what that would look like. It would be a form that would tell you everything about the accessory dwelling unit, what we would be looking for in that application. It would have, your name, the property information, phone number. We would ask for the size of the accessory structure, the size of the primary principal structure, the number of parking spaces on site, and there's a requirement again for 1 parking space per accessory dwelling unit, and that's already in our county code for off-site parking requirements. We ask will it be attached, detached, or within the principal structure. The number of dwellings on the property, and you can only have 2. You can have your primary principal structure and 1 accessory. You would only be allowed to have 1 accessory dwelling unit per property. Square footage, property owner's name and signature, and then our other application information internal to us. So that's what we're envisioning that the permit application would look like. So what is the process? So you would submit and complete an application. So currently, we actually have an accessory apartment permit application. And we have a link to it under our Howard County website for when you have to fill out for accessory apartment permits. And we expect the review time to be similar to what it is now. So about 1 to 2 week turnaround time frame. And these questions here were actually submitted to us. So I'm kind of integrating it because it went well with the presentation, the questions that were pre-submitted into this part of the presentation. Is there an appeal process by applicant or residents? And so no, not for this particular ADU process, because that's not how it's been presented in this current legislation. And again, you're just submitting for very specific things. It's either you meet the criteria for the permit or you don't. What are the costs and fees to the county? So right now we have our fee currently for an accessory apartment set at $25. And the last question for this is, where is it permitted and where is it not permitted? And so again, we already went through a lot of the districts, but it's permitted as it's currently proposed in all districts where single family detached zoning is allowed. Okay. What factors come into play regarding parking? So again, as we stated earlier, off-street parking is regulated for current accessory apartments at 1 space per accessory dwelling unit. And this is found in our off-street parking regulations, which is section 133 of our code. So there you can see what those are. And the state, what they have said for off-street parking requirements is part of this is if you are to increase your off-street parking requirements, you have to do a parking study. Since we are not considering strengthening or adding additional parking requirements to this legislation, we are not compelled to do a off-street parking study because we're keeping them as they are. And the thought process behind that is why would we make an accessory parking any more strict or as strict than our current residential parking requirements? And currently our residential parking requirements are 2 parking spaces. So what would the thought be of making that as strict or more stringent than our current primary principal structures? Another good question came in about well and septic. So what factors come into play for that? So well and septic is obviously different than being built on water and sewer, which would be built in the planned service area. So if you were to build on well and septic, which is really found in Western Howard County outside the planned service area. So when you have a building permit, when that's issued, depending on the lot size, and typically in Howard County, as with most other jurisdictions, you really need a 2-acre minimum to even begin to build on well and septic, because you need 1 acre for your primary well and septic and an acre reserve. And you need at least 100-foot separation between your well and your septic system. And then you need distance from your primary structures and other factors. And all this is set by the Howard County Health Department. And they would make that determination depending on where your ADU is situated, whether you're doing it attached or detached from your property. So that's the different issues that you would face when you are building on well and septic. And then what factors come into play with stormwater management? So stormwater management is an interesting character. When you have detached ADUs, stormwater management, especially this would only really come into play with detached ADUs specifically, but even if you had a attached ADU by a common wall, you would still need to have, rain spouts, downspouts coming down from your house. But if you had a detached, we only calculate stormwater management. That's part of the law, is required for disturbances over 5,000 square feet. So you would have to have a sufficiently large ADU to even trigger stormwater management. However, as I said earlier, with the listing of issues we will look at in an accessory dwelling unit application, we would ask for water conveyance on site to be demonstrated on the plot plan for disturbances under this amount. So meaning we would look to make sure that you were not having water flow that would go into someone else's yard, perhaps when you were to build your detached accessory dwelling unit. So let's look at this table here for a quick comparison about how the ADU regulations that we're proposing lines up with our current regulations, some of the high points. So again, our current zoning regulations require it to be owner occupied, as well as Council Bill 3, maximum number of bedrooms, 2 for both our current regs and CB3. Our current ADU size, 1/3 of the net, or up to 1,500 square feet. Following along with what the state law requires, but we are a little less than the state maximum. 75% of the primary structure building footprint and less than the state, and this is less than the state permitted max. So again, we're increasing the size of what our current regulations are, but we are still less than what the state allowance was. Number of parking spaces, we are still requiring 1. And the state requires you to consider them. So that's why we put that but this is within the current state and county regulations. Common wall attachment, our current zoning regulations require that, and we are allowing both attached and detached. Separation by from the primary dwelling. And so we're obviously allowing it to be detached, and a permit required, and yes for both, and that is a county requirement. And then for 2-family dwellings, as you can see under our current regulations, it is a conditional use in all the districts in which they are currently permitted. And then our new proposal, we are saying that they are permitted in the RR, RC, and R20 under the current zoning regulations, and then only permitted in parcels that are 16,000 square feet or greater in the RED and R12. And so the 2-family dwellings in the RC, RR, and R20 would be, based on their lot size requirements for those districts, which are 1 unit per 3 acres in the RC and RR, and then 20,000 square feet for the R20 district. So this is just examples of ADUs and 2-family dwellings that you would typically see out and about, just to give you some context of what you would expect to see with ADUs in your community. So just a quick look here, because I want to make sure we're cognizant of time and we have a lot of slides still to go through. But here would be an example, even though this is a side-by-side duplex, to the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that this would also be an example of a 2-family dwelling where there is no separation by a breezeway or a garage. So this could be a good example of a duplex at the bottom. So all of the, of a 2-family dwelling. So all of the bottom examples could be examples of 2-family dwellings as we've envisioned them with the code and what we currently have in the county. So again, here is another good example of where ADUs would be allowed in the county. And you can see how they would be allowed as accessory in all of the districts outlined below. And again, within the Newtown district as well, they would be allowed there. Okay, so now we're going to go to what we're calling our myth busting section of frequently heard concerns. So one of the top ones that we've heard is that accessory dwelling units are only suitable for large properties. And honestly, that's a falsehood. ADUs can fit to a variety of lot sizes. many communities have embraced ADU construction on smaller lots. As a matter of fact, we've even seen townhome communities with ADUs, especially if there's detached garages, like an example, like a carriage house garage style. There's, it very well could have an accessory dwelling unit there. I don't know how many people are familiar with Kentlands or King Farm in Montgomery County, or even if you were to look at Maple Lawn, those garage homes could theoretically be converted into accessory dwelling units. So small lots can have an ADU detached, as well as ADUs internal to their structures. There won't be enough parking for ADUs. So again, ADUs require the same additional parking as accessory apartments currently do in today's regulations. So there's no change for that. And for off-street parking, and we don't anticipate that additional parking beyond one space would be needed. And then ADUs are only for rental income. And as we talked about earlier in the presentation, we feel that ADUs can serve for multiple reasons. Not only could it be just a home for someone, but a lot of people, as we know, since especially the post-COVID era, people are working from home and they may want all the amenities of the interior of their home external to their home. So they may want a kitchen facility, they may want a bathroom in a separate space external to their homes. They may not even desire to have someone even living in that space. They may want it as a full office space for themselves. Or it may serve for a single family member, an elderly family member, or a family member with different abilities to live in that housing unit. So it's not just for rental income, it can serve a real vital purpose for that particular family. Laws make it impossible to build. Well, we're really hoping with this legislation and the state law that we have another tool in the toolbox to make it easier and more affordable to build. ADUs ruin the character of a neighborhood, and we hear that a lot. I know there's a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety over what an ADU will bring, especially detached to the community, but they are already here. We already have attached ADUs in our community, and we already have internal ADUs in their community. But even detached ADUs will not be visible. As you can see from the picture here, given appropriate size, scale, and character, ADUs will remain within the character of the community. Now, the state law will not allow homeowners associations to prohibit accessory dwelling units or the rental of accessory dwelling units, but they still can control the architectural look and feel of an accessory dwelling unit. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to the character of the community and having it continue to blend in and serve as a really nice functioning piece of additional housing within your community. And this is a really interesting one because, again, we hear a lot about adequate public facilities, and especially with schools and school overcrowding. And when it comes to ADUs and testing for schools and what the long-term issues and concerns are. And one of the things that we've talked about, especially as housing units are built, and we've seen demonstrated, is that when we have apartments, when we have studios, the pupil yield factor for those types of construction is lower than a traditional single family unit. And actually, we see the most students yielding out of turnover of homes. However, we see that adequate public facility testing for ADUs for schools has proven really to be unnecessary. And this came from Montgomery County, as the units are generally occupied by empty nesters. This may be a function of the size and the number of bedrooms of ADUs. And this came from Montgomery County as a quote from their Maryland ADU task force,
Meeting number 4, summary. And I thought this was a really interesting quote to share. This information that they provided came from their public schools data on the location that they've received from every single student in the county. And it allowed them to associate that a student with the property and the type of unit on that property, so they can see how many students are coming into the school system from properties that have ADUs compared to those that don't, and they're really identical. So generally what that tells you is that they don't have 2 sets of families living on those properties with ADUs. Now, will there be some ADUs that have families living there? Absolutely. But will that be the dominant people that are living in those ADUs? We don't believe it will be. So I wanted to provide links to additional resources, and again, our zoning regulation amendments, so you can see exactly what's been put forward by us. A link to, again, and I believe this has also been put in the chat, the House bill, and a link to the frequently asked questions from the state. I want to provide you too with some next steps. So council hearing is Tuesday, January 20th, because Monday is a federal holiday and we will be closed. So council has shifted everything by 1 day. And that begins at 7 p.m. And we really do hope that you come out and support this important legislation. As you know, not only is Howard County having issues with affordable housing, but so is the region. Is this the panacea? We know it's not, but is this another tool in the toolbox for affordable housing? Absolutely. Not only do we recognize it, but the state does, the planning community does. It is another best practice that we are utilizing for affordable housing. And then council's taking action on this February 2nd, we hope. We understand they may not, but we really hope that they take action on this bill. So now we're going to move toward submitted questions that we want to answer. And thank you to all of those who took time to submit questions prior to today. We really do appreciate your time and consideration in these thoughtful questions that were submitted. So the first question is, will the ADU rules apply to Columbia residents as well? So I just kind of put these in as they were sent to us. So I just copied and pasted them. So yes, the ADU would be subject to the setback lot coverage outlined in the final development plan. And I have a link to the frequently asked questions. That's where the answers will be posted. And in addition to that, we received 2 additional questions that we will put in more detail, but we also have information on how, because Columbia predominantly is under Newtown zoning, we have a step-by-step on how it will apply to Newtown zoning specifically. But since it's a multi-step process and has a lot of pieces, that will be posted on this link as well. So we'll have all of this on that webpage. Please explain the ramifications for those living under an HOA. Will ADU be allowed or HOA be allowed to prohibit them? So as I said earlier, no. Under the new law, HOAs will not be able to prohibit ADUs. However, you may be able to control architectural review, etc. But one thing I would caution is that each HOA will need to confirm how to apply the law with their legal counsel. And I'm not only saying this, but if you go to the frequently asked questions under the Maryland Department of Planning's web link, they also suggest going to your HOA's legal counsel for how you plan on enforcing anything in addition to ADU legislation. Number 3, are there any specific restrictions for Western Howard County, such as on lots serviced by well and septic outside of the planned service area? And again, we talked about this earlier in the presentation. You will need to work with the health department to see where the ADU can be located on the site and whether the existing can handle the addition. So again, if you're doing attached ADU, If your system is sized correctly, you can probably hook in to your existing septic system, and you can probably draw from your existing well. If you are doing a detached, you're probably going to have to create a new septic and drill a new well. That would, again, would be depending on what your plan is like and what the health department says. Will there be a lot minimum size? Not as the current legislation is proposed. Beyond whatever our current standards say for each zoning district. So I'll qualify that statement with that. Will there be a primary residence restriction? So again, we answered this in the presentation, but yes, the property owner must reside in either the primary dwelling or within the accessory dwelling unit. We don't care where you live, but you have to live in one of the two. And the reason we say not the primary is because say, you are an older person and you have a daughter and son-in-law, and they're actually renting their home from you, and they live in the primary structure because you don't want to take care of that big house anymore, but you want to sell it to them. You may want to live in the accessory dwelling unit instead, but you're still the primary owner of that structure. So that might be your particular arrangement, and that works best for you. That's what we don't want to dictate where people live. How will resales be regulated? Stipulations. So the ADU goes with the residence. I mean, if it's internal, we're not going to let you sever off the internal third of your home if it's in the basement to sell that separately from your primary rest of your structure. They cannot be subdivided or resold separate from the primary dwelling unit. Number 7, the planning board added the owner occupancy standards back into its recommendation. Will this requirement stand for all zones? And how does the county plan to enforce this? So as we said, yes, this currently applies to all zoning districts that permit accessory apartments and all zoning districts that would allow ADUs. And so how we're going to enforce this is if you are renting it out currently, you have to have a rental license agreement. So the property owner must reside in either the primary dwelling or within the ADU. So we would enforce this through the rental licensing agreement. So when you go to get your rental licensing agreement through Department of Inspections, Licensing and Permits, they would ask where do you live and the addresses better match to where you're living and where that rental is being located for your accessory dwelling unit. Again, will there be a minimum lot size? Not as the current legislation stands for ADUs, but there is for 2-family dwellings. There are minimum lot sizes for the RCR and R20 districts, and lots that are greater than 16,000 square feet for the RED and R12. Number 9, is there an appeal process by applicants or residents? If so, what is it? And I would just say appeal for, I guess, anything happening. We do have appeal, so it's kind of an interesting question. I mean, any decision made by the department can be typically appealed to the hearings examiner within 30 days of the decision is typical. Our typical appeal process, I guess it depends on what's being appealed at any given time. And so we were taking this in terms of the legislation, not necessarily an ADU application. Is there a distinction between attached and detached ADU? Yes. Attached ADUs are within or attached to the primary dwelling by a common wall, and we showed the schematics of that earlier. Detached are separated from the primary structure and within the accessory setback and bulk requirements of the zoning district. And they have to be on the same lot, so within that setback. Is a variance permitted for adjustments to structure size or setback requirements? Yes, just as they are in the current code, depending if an administrative adjustment or variance is needed. And that would be depending on how much of a percentage of an adjustment you would need to where things are being located. When will the new law be applicable? And laws go into effect 61 days after they are signed into law in Howard County. what is the what grandfathering language is in the new code or proposed, if still pending, related to ADUs? And I mean, existing ADUs, if they're already here, will be grandfathered in via current non-conforming use standards if necessary, but all ADUs would be permitted then at that point. I don't believe anything would be non-conforming. Okay. Two more pre-submitted questions, and then we can take some from the chat. Director Eisenberg has stated that ADUs are not subject to APFO. The bill specifically allows infrastructure regulation while ruling out ADUs' effect on density calculations. I believe the two are separate things, and ADUs are subject to APFO. Can Director Eisenberg state why this is not true? For example, school weight bins are based on predictions of school capacity for a specific school's entire attendance area, not density. Okay. Though the state law does allow for APFO to be considered for ADUs, which is something that we just received the guidance on when the frequently asked questions from the state came out, because the bill is not very clear on that. So we were happy to have that guidance from the state. Howard County does not currently apply APFO tests for accessory apartments, and we talked about that earlier in the presentation. In Howard County, APFO is tested at the subdivision and site plan process. So currently accessory apartments do not require either. So APFO is not tested currently. Additions or accessory structures are subject to building permit requirements only under 5,000 square feet and are not subject to red line requirements. So that is why they are not subject to APFO testing in Howard County. And again, they could be a ADU today, and again, they could also be built for an office space or something else. So again, just because the assumption is it's an accessory dwelling unit, as they say, maybe the intent is to not even have someone living there. They could be built for other reasons in general. Whoops. Are ADUs over 800 square feet subject to school impact fees? The law doesn't seem to treat ADUs greater than 800 square feet as anything different than what was required for housing units. So I'm not sure why 800 square feet came up. And there was some other talk thinking that this bill had something in it regarding limitations on impact fees for 800 square feet. So I guess if someone in the chat wants to clarify where that came from, I think if they're here that's submitted, that would be really helpful. However, as with any building permit fees, they are calculated and assessed at the time of the plan review, and paid for the permit can be issued. So how they're currently calculated is that current permit fee rate for residential is 25 cents per square foot. We have an excise tax of $1.91 per square foot, and school facilities at $8.35 per square foot. However, the first 2,000 square feet of an addition is assessed at $1.32. So, for example, if you had an attached ADU, and these don't include ones that are like in your home, because that really wouldn't be included in this, because it's already part of what you would have paid as part of the square footage of your home when it was built, but you're adding an addition on. So an attached or detached ADU, a 2,000 square feet, roughly would pay $6,960 in those fees. But then when you go to 2,500 square feet, because that 500 square feet, so the first 2,000 square feet would be at that lower surcharge rate, but the higher surcharge rate, that $8.35, would then be charged for that 500 feet over. So they would pay $12,215 dollars. So we really don't believe, regardless, 2,500 for an accessory dwelling unit is pretty large. We don't really think we're going to have that many. I mean, that's larger than most people's homes. And again, this is an accessory dwelling unit. Could we have really big ADUs? Absolutely. Do we think most people would build something that large? Probably not. From some of the research that we've seen, most ADUs are probably going to be around that 800 to 1,000 square foot range. if even. So, and again, with the 2-bedroom max, so we believe there'll be way less than that. But you can see even with, you know, again, it's a tool in the toolbox, but when you take all the fees involved, adding on top of the actual cost of building them, it does start to add up. So again, with that, we're going to take questions from the chat. I'm going to keep this up, but what we're asking folks to do, since again, we have 398 people on the line, is if we don't get to your questions, which we're not going to probably, because I don't know how many questions we have from the chat, and Julia's going to take the questions from the chat because she's had time to look at them. To submit your additional questions by January 14th to planning@howardcountymd.gov. That's the same email address where you submitted your questions for today. And then we're going to have them posted. All questions will be posted by Tuesday, the 21st. So you have them in time for the council hearing on Tuesday. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to leave this up and I'm going to turn it over to Julia Sauer. And that's 5 o'clock. So if you guys can hang around to hear the questions, that concludes my presentation. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you, Linda, for a great presentation. So we're going to go over a few of the questions that we got during the chat. One question that we received: how does this new law create affordable home ownership, and wouldn't it drive up the price of property? So the ADU legislation is proposed to address the extreme housing shortage we are having in Howard County and in Maryland in general. By allowing for a second source of income, it would make housing more affordable for some families while offering lower rent for other families. Then we had questions. We had multiple questions about the owner occupancy requirement that Linda went over in her response, but current regulations for an accessory apartment require either the house, the primary house, or the accessory apartment to be owner occupied. We are retaining that requirement for this legislation. We had a question about, do the accessory dwelling units have to be sprinklered? So the building code is what regulates the requirements for buildings to be sprinklered. So this bill is not impacting the building code. So any building code requirements would still be applicable.
And Julia, if I may, when I also attended a state ADU discussion, yes, they have to be sprinklered as well. And that was explicitly said there as well.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And then we had a question about the maximum size of an ADU. So the current regulations have a cap of accessory apartments at 1,500 square feet. This legislation that we're proposing is removing that 1,500 square foot cap, and we're taking the state's requirement for 75% of the size of the primary structure. And we're applying size as the footprint of the primary structure. So your accessory dwelling unit could not exceed 75% of the footprint of the primary structure. So that is different with this proposed legislation. We had a question about, do you pay property taxes on an ADU? So the State Department of Assessments and Taxation determines the taxable assessment of your real property. An ADU could increase your property's assessed value, which could impact your property taxes. We had another question about, do you need to remove an accessory dwelling unit if you sell your property? No, the ADU does not need to be removed if you sell your property, and it would just transfer ownership. And then, can you have a shed, an accessory dwelling unit, and a house located on the property? And the answer is yes. We had a question about the proposed changes. Would they apply to ADUs in the Newtown zoning district? As Linda stated, the ADU legislation will apply to Newtown zoning. So currently, Newtown zoning allows the same accessory uses as our residential single cluster zoning district. So since ADUs are permitted as an accessory use in the residential single cluster district, Newtown would also be allowed to have an ADU. Now, the only caveat to that is if your final development plan for your specific neighborhood specifically said that an ADU was prohibited, then it would not be permitted, but there is a process that you can go through to amend your final development plan to allow it.
So essentially what that means is the final development plan is the more specific in that instance. So the more specific in zoning, that is what rules govern.
Correct. But although it may not be permitted, there is a process to go through that potentially you could have it permitted. And then the final question that we received is in the Newtown zoning district, there was a 12,000 square foot minimum lot size to have an accessory dwelling unit. So that is under the current legislation and order or current law, that in order to have an accessory dwelling unit, you need a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet. This proposed legislation removes that minimum lot size. So under this proposed legislation, you would be able to have an accessory dwelling unit if your lot was less than 12,000 square feet. And those are the questions that we received.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Hi, Laura.
Yes.
Hi, Laura.
So let's see. Is this, okay, so question. Does this mean the ADU goes away if as part of a resale, the next owner doesn't occupy either building? So in order for, if a property is sold, say you have a detached accessory dwelling unit, and you sell the property, the new homeowner, if they wish to rent the accessory dwelling unit, they would either have to reside in the primary house or the accessory dwelling unit. They don't have to rent
Right.
either one. So they could just have it as an accessory structure on their property.
Correct. So in order to rent to rent the ADU, they'd have to live in the primary structure.
Correct.
The owner, yeah. The idea is we are trying to deter investors from buying and renting.
And they say also, what if an owner occupant needs to rent the property due to a job relocation but doesn't sell the property? So you could essentially rent it as having your primary structure with another detached structure, but you don't
Correct.
have to rent.
But you could only rent
One of them, correct.
Yes, you could only rent one of those. So if I rent the primary structure, I would just have this great accessory dwelling
Yep.
unit in my backyard for my enjoyment.
Correct.
Julia, there's a question in your email. It came from Chris.
Will there be changes to health department regulations to make it more feasible and affordable for ADUs to be permitted and built?
I think that's well and septic.
So this is, yeah, if a homeowner is on septic, the health department is requiring all new engineered percolation testing for living and non-living structures. If the septic system is older than 15 years.
We have not heard if the health department is going to be changing their regulations. Well, again, we will take your questions up to January 14th, and we will post all questions by January 21st. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for staying over. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care, and this will be posted.